As we near the conclusion of our series on the Wilderness Tabernacle, we want to draw our attention to the events that transpired when the tabernacle was fully assembled. And this takes us out of the 20s of the book of Exodus, where the construction began to be explained in chapter 25. And it takes us then to the assembly, which starts in about chapter 35 and brings us right to the close of the book of Exodus in chapter 40. But let's follow our usual routine of remembering what are the phases of devotion and relationship that the tabernacle brings us into. This time I trust that it's sufficiently familiar to you that I won't provide any audio commentary on this. I'll encourage you to remind yourself, prompted by the different caption balloons that are offered here. I would encourage you, as you see these going by, endeavor as much as possible to embrace them, not just observe them, but embrace them, make them your own heart attitude. And that brings us then to the events that are described in the last chapter. Notice the citation in the lower left, Exodus 40. This is the last chapter of the book of Exodus. And here we read that when everything was in place, from the fencing outside, the 7.5 foot high linen fencing with a multicolored gate, the bronze altar was in place, the laver was in place, and the tabernacle proper had been set up with its various coverings, protective and ornamental, some embroidered and some just durable leather. The holy place had been set up with its golden table, spread out with the 12 pieces of bread, inviting the tribes, as it were, through their representative, the priest, to come and sit and enjoy God's hospitality. The candelabra, the menorah, was in place with its very pure oil. The lamps were in operation, and the golden altar, a smaller altar there just opposite. The Ark of the Covenant with the heavy curtain between, that was in place. The ark was in place. Inside it were the tablets. Inside it was the jar of manna. Aaron's rod would not yet have been placed inside. Over top that thick slab of gold, the mercy seat, and on top of that, the two cherubim, reminiscent of the terrible power attending God in his supernatural bodyguards. All this was in place. And when that was complete, we read, then the cloud, that cloud that is how God represented his presence prior to this time. This was the pillar of fire by night and cloud by day, the pillar that separated the chasing Egyptian army from the Israelites when they were at the edge of the Red Sea. That pillar. Now here, that cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. There was a tangible transition as this cloud moved in, and some sense of glory, an overwhelming sense. We don't know what it looked like. Was it a sense of brilliance? Was it simply a spiritual awareness that no one could deny? There was a glory about it. Often glory is attendant with radiance, a luminous display. Moses, please notice, not even Moses himself, this one who had been talking with God in such rich intimacy, so much so that he would emerge from God's presence in earlier conversations with such a stored up radiant splendor on his face that it hurt people to look at him. He was so bright he would put a covering over himself, over his face. Even this individual who had been granted such unique access to God at this point was unable to enter the tent. In previous times, he could be in a different tent of meeting in God's presence. This time, no, because the cloud settled on it. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. If earlier on we had been working hard to ingrain this scripture, Exodus 25:8, that God's intent of this building was so that his presence could be near them, now there is no question. This is not just a figurative idea, but God is physically putting a sign of his nearness with them. He wants them to understand this building as his palace. And so the tabernacle's purpose finally was fulfilled. Not a site for simple execution of religious ceremony, but a location, a residence like Buckingham Palace, where you could enter the presence of the monarch, this time not a mere human monarch, but the celestial, eternal monarch. As you are aware, the Wilderness Tabernacle became a template, a model, for what would later become Solomon's Temple. I wonder if you are aware what happened at the same juncture with the assembling of materials and construction of this other structure, Solomon's Temple, many years later, perhaps 2-3 centuries later. Here's what we read, and now we're in 1 Kings chapter 8. There has been the amassing of material. There has been the preparation of the various construction pieces, and then the assembly. And just as in Exodus 40, when the assembly was finished, we are told this of Solomon's temple. When the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. Can you imagine this? If you've been in a foggy situation, or perhaps ridden in an airplane when it's passing through a literal cloud made of nothing but water vapor, you know there's no stopping you. You can walk right through that fog. The airplane easily knifes through it. This cloud was different. There was something of divine presence which for some reason, we don't know quite how to explain it, it's the people, the priests, even the priests who were consecrated, ordained, and legitimately in that space serving God as he had commanded them, they had to leave. They simply could not stand it. God's presence was so overwhelming. Continuing with the reading, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever. Once again, the understanding was that this building was not just for checking off a list of religious ceremonies to satisfy God and make us feel better. It was a place to encounter a presence. Certainly, there are guidelines for how to relate to God, and that's the beautiful gift of the architecture and furnishings of the tabernacle and temple. They give us hints as far as how to relate to God, but the goal through it all is indeed relating to God, not just going through ceremonies. It happened at the tabernacle in the wilderness, and now it happened at the climax of the building of Solomon's temple. God moved in. The sense of God's presence singularly among his people does not stop in the Hebrew Bible. In our next episode, we'll move on into the New Testament era and trace this same theme.